Hey, Bryony, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brittany, thank you for having me.
Of course, a long time coming. You were like the
Oh,
like go-to thought leader down south, the land down under.
that makes you the go-to leader up north then.
It's really fun to finally meet you, what a way to start an interview just by meeting each other,
Yeah, it's so cool. It's so cool. I've heard your name a zillion times now. So here we go. Here we are.
Well, let's kick off the interview by talking about you and your background. So, where are you
Great.
from? What did you study? And then how did you end up here?
Okay, yes. So I am from Melbourne, Australia, and I feel like I was going through this earlier today. I've had like 25 different careers before I fell into sex tech. I started out studying commerce at university and getting into economics and things that I really just didn't even like, but ended up just doing the right thing at the right time, I guess, is what I was told to do, and followed that path for a while, really until my 30s. I was working in tech. I was working for startups, which led me to here in New York, where I am today. And I was always really interested in the way people were using technology and the stories behind it, the humans behind it. And so once I sort of found my own feet in New York and found what I was really interested in, which was women and sexuality, and thinking about why is no one talking about technology in these dimensions, in these realms, about what it means for women, what it means for our future, for relationships and love. And that is really where I kicked off the podcast, Future of Sex, about 6 years ago, talking to anyone that would talk to me about what is the future of sex and what does sex tech mean. And it was a total accident that I was in New York, which really has been the hub for so many innovators and entrepreneurs in this field. So I got really lucky, and from there, that I sort of found my feet, found my purpose 6 years ago when I started that.
Why do you think New York City is a hub for a lot of sex tech stuff? I mean, Dame Products just won their lawsuit against the New York City Metro subway. Cindy Gallup is there with Make Love, Not Porn. So what is it about New York City?
Yeah, I think there's a mixture. I think there's, it's pretty progressive. All the sort of, I think coastal cities usually are a bit more progressive, a bit more open, close to Europe. I think there's a proximity and a driver of like New York just being so much energy. And I think the other part is the people that self-organized. So Polly Rodriguez, who's the founder of Unbound Babes, and Lydia Bonilla, who used to have House of Plume, which was a sex toy box storage company. They founded Women of Sextech and created a community. And I think that has a large part, a large role in why it is the Sex Tech Hub. They created this community where there was the intention to meet up and discuss what you're working on. And it blossomed. It started when I joined. I was at Cindy Gallup's apartment. I know you've had Cindy on the show. Yeah. And we had a small gathering there, maybe only 30 women. But I couldn't believe it. I'd just been researching the podcast and had interviewed Cindy. I couldn't believe, oh my gosh, there's 30 people in one room all working on this. Mm-hmm. And today we see, Women of Sextech and those organizations, they're hundreds of people and also all over the world. But I think that, the environment being so progressive, but also the fact that people organize communities really helped solidify New York as the spot for sex tech.
That's interesting because FemTech, I feel like, has really boomed in the last 24 months. I like to think that FemTech Focus has some part in that. I no longer have to harp on what the definition is. I don't have to as often say, no, not FinTech, FemTech. I don't have to say, no, not female founder, women's health, but we don't have a hub. There is still not a city that's like, we're the FemTech hub. And I wonder if it's because so much of our growth took place during the pandemic. So like FemTech home base is Zoom.
It needs a home. You need to find it a home.
Yeah, there's no real central city for it.
I think this is a great opportunity also coming out of the pandemic. Whenever we actually get out of it, is people do want to meet again in person and realize the value in that. And I think that's almost an opportunity to be like, okay, well, where is our hub city? Or are there 5 different ones, you know.
Yeah, that's true. Because you could have a CPG one and then the healthcare one, right? So interesting. I'm glad we're brainstorming on record.
Yeah. We're planning the future right now. Why not? No, I'm such a believer in community. I think it really helps drive innovation and industries forward, but it also helps the humans in it, right? We all need support, and especially in the industries we work in where it's taboo, it's vice, we have to explain it 15 times to people. You want to be around people that get it, because then you can have the harder conversations around censorship or finding investors. But getting into this industry, it's so important. We have these groups of people, whether they live on Zoom or you got to know where to find them.
Yep. Yeah. Well, so when you first got into the sex tech industry, was it called sex tech? Was that a word yet?
You know what? I think it was, because Cindy Gallup, she didn't coin the term, but she definitely propagated its usage with her Hot Topics article, which was in 2011, that said, what is sex tech and why is everyone ignoring it? And I remember that because I looked up sex and technology to start the podcast, Future of Sex. And that was one of the first articles that came up. And I was like, okay, all right. So it's, 2011 was when I can date back to the terminology, but of course, sex tech has existed for as long as humans have existed making things. I mean, technology is, I think, just a tool to do something, right? So it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be AI or VR or even web-based, especially with sex tech, like dildos and things like that, stone dildos that are 35,000 years old, the antiques. I don't know if you've seen those in museums. That's sex tech too. We just didn't have a term for it, but it's just a tool that allows us to do a thing. In this case, under the umbrella of sex.
Yeah. I said it just wasn't Bluetooth enabled yet.
Yeah, exactly. That was to come, and a couple of thousand years later.
And so what is the future of sex? It's your podcast. And why did you start it?
Yeah, so the future of sex was really this exploration for me into, well, what does the future look like now that technology, I'd been at Microsoft and technology had infiltrated so much of the office. I was like, but what about our personal lives? We'd seen social media, so much of our social lives. Technology in the bedroom or in, our emotional connections. When we think about love and intimacy, it's not just the actual sex, it's like how we express ourselves to our partners and lovers. And so for me, that was really like, this is an excuse to explore what it's going to mean for me in the future, and to be able to, solidify or understand what's going on with my heart and also with everything that surrounds me in this world, which is technology and smartphones. And that was what it started out as. I think now, fast forward 5 years and it's gone all over the place. It's not just about technology. I think the last season was so much more an exploration of like issues that people were going through in the pandemic related to intimacy. Even stuff like talking to your partners, all the skills that aren't like that futuristic, but we still lack them in terms of like compassion, empathy, listening, communication, your fantasies, infidelity, all those things. So Future of Sex also morphed into, I would say, like a sex and relationships, exploration. And then for me personally, being involved in the industry, I'm super interested in how it's growing, just, right behind FemTech, I feel like, and thinking about not only the emotional paradigm, but also the business. So what does the business look like, and what's the innovations, and who are the people behind the businesses, and what's going on there? So it's kind of this two-pronged thing of like a very personal mission for people understanding, but also the professional side.
Did you anticipate it was going to be your full-time thing?
I think I really wanted it to be, and I had left my job and I remember shooting this video and going, oh my gosh, I'm committing to doing this. And the way I'm going to commit, my friend was like, you have to shoot a video and tell everyone you're doing it.
I love that.
So cringe, but I did. And I ended up for the first 2 years really not making that much money, which was a big shock. Coming from a corporate world to, oh my gosh, I have to Airbnb out my house and walk dogs and, all that stuff you do because you love it. But I knew, I got this advice and I believed it at the start, that if you can stay in the podcast game for 2 years, then you'll be fine. Then you'll be set. I don't know if that was the same for you,
Oh
Brittany.
my God. I'm literally like, I'm almost upset we're recording this right now, y'all. You're going to hear what's up because we're about to hit 2 years. So in March, it'll be 2 years for the podcast. And I just updated my Rover dog walking profile because I'm not making a ton of money, right?
Yeah.
I'm making enough to make ends meet, but I'm like, there are nights. And listeners, please, like, if you're a founder and you're feeling like this, know that I feel like this. There are many nights I lay down and I say, should I just go get a job at Bayer? Like, should I just go get a healthcare package from Johnson and Johnson? Like, I got a freaking PhD, 6 figures in student debt. Like, but I love talking about vulvas and I like my pink hair and I like traveling the world and telling people to think about women as not little men, you know, like, and so you're giving me that eventually it'll work out.
so many nights like that. And that is such a common occurrence for people in this industry because it's so hard, because we come from a personal mission of like, I want to talk about vulvas and this is so important to me. We're not really starting out going, whoa, we're going to make the big bucks straight away like you would be in fintech or crypto or something like that. This is such a personally motivated industry. You know that if you're listening, you have a burning desire to do it. And sometimes, you know what, that light goes out because you're like, this is too hard. I'm Airbnb-ing every single room in my place. What am I doing? And I had so many of those moments over the past 6 years where I went back, I tried to get jobs. And then people were like, what, you're doing Future of Sex? So then they wouldn't hire me. And then so I'd piece together different things and started consulting in the industry, which I think is a really helpful way to transition. And now, you know, now I can't imagine not doing it, but it's certainly, there's been multiple times where I've wanted to stop and give up. And there's been multiple months where I have, you know, where there's been no podcast go out or there's been nothing happen because I'm like, this is too hard. I need to reevaluate my life. But here we are. We're coming up to 2 years. I'm coming up to 6 and we're still here. So if we're in it, we're
here. We are still here. I think it is important to consider your own health and wellness because I think that a lot of times founders will be working and innovating for women's health and they're a woman who is drowning in anxiety or an eating disorder or whatever. And it's like, if you're going to portray, you know, health and wellness, you got to live it too. So you started Sextech School. What is Sextech School?
Yeah. So that's my latest project, my baby. I absolutely love it. As I said before, I'm obsessed with communities. I think they're the key to everything, just in terms of building industries, but also like helping other people. And Sextech School was a way for me to pour my knowledge back into the community of being in this industry and knowing how hard it is to get started and feeling so isolated when I started and not knowing, well, what do I do if my Instagram gets shut down? Or how can I like go about thinking about a business model? And so I put together Sextech School during the pandemic as a 6-week program to take aspiring entrepreneurs, people that maybe already have a prototype or people that just want to change careers, right? Like me 6 years ago, oh my God, this is so interesting. How do I get involved? And take them through this journey around sex tech, looking at, here's the market. Have you got an idea? Here's how to get an idea, or here's how to validate your idea. And walk them through, you know, the key, I think, pillars of getting involved in an industry like sex tech that are really unique: branding, business models, and community. And what ended up happening is we've run that, I think, coming up to 5 times now, is we have this amazing community of entrepreneurs and people building businesses and people all around the world. It's virtual. There's no site for this school, but still connect to this day, have lives every month and talk and help one and each other and hire each other, and really set about going and building businesses in the space. So for me, that's like my big baby for next year. I just want to keep growing it and ideally send like 1,000 people through the school and see what happens.
Is it like an accelerator?
I'd say it's like a pre-accelerator.
Cool.
Because graduates have gone on to get into accelerators or to raise money. Some people come in having raised a little bit of money already. So it's that sweet spot because there is no accelerator for sex tech.
I was going to ask that. Yeah. What programs exist?
Yeah, there isn't many. And now I think accelerators are warming up to the idea of sex tech, and we're seeing them accept and go, oh, this is super interesting. Like, let's make this a formal part or take a cohort on. But right now there's nothing. And I think the scope for Sextech School is probably to roll out a 3-month program and do a longer accelerator version at some point. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself. I feel like the 6 weeks has been the really special time because it's so intensive.
Yeah.
People come together every single week to really work on a project and to focus. And I think there's something in that accountability that 6 weeks feels just enough time. 3 months is like, oh, that's a quarter of the year.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah. Well, do you think that I have some opinions about the everyday accelerators taking on femtech, because there are unique things that femtech founders need to know, need to deal with, need to overcome, and there's certain things that they shouldn't have to deal with, like a mentor saying something weird, or people not knowing vagina versus vulva and them spending most of their pitches describing, do you feel the same for sex tech, that there's actually kind of some danger in an everyday accelerator being like, yeah, we're going to do sex tech now?
100%. And, in some sense, there's an inevitability. They're going to do it because femtech and sex tech are hot right now.
It's right. I know. And I'm like, I laid the groundwork and you're going to come in here, mess it up. There's people publishing like, oh, femtech. And it's an article about makeup. And I'm like, this is not femtech. That's an insult to femtech. Women's beauty is not uterine fibroids. Okay. Like,
yeah, I know. And I mean, the thing is, Brittany, what do you do? Like,
no.
What do you do? I think you just make the program. And that's why Sextech School exists. I'm like, this is going to happen. It's already happening. I'm seeing Y Combinator look at sex tech companies. I'm seeing local Australian accelerators really interested in sex tech companies. So what can we do? We can build our own stuff and
them to hire us. Consulting contracts to get their program right.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And they can hire us, or we can build a better one, maybe.
Yeah.
That's the approach I'm taking. And I think I feel like I learned that over the years when I started to feel like, what, this isn't sex tech, or when things would happen, you're like, what are they talking about? This is totally off base. This is going to happen. This is like the adoption curve. There's confusion. There's all these other things, people coming in,
and then all of a
sudden it. Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, maybe this is a positive thing because there's momentum, even if it's like the wrong track.
What is sex tech to you? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, I think of it really simply as these two words, sexuality and technology, right? And the two sort of the Venn diagram of how those two come together. My formal definition is any technology designed to enhance sexuality, but that sounds just really boring and dry. And I think if you put everything under the sexuality bucket, beyond just sex and orgasms, but certainly including them, things like sex education, a big passion of mine, sexual violence prevention, pain, just painful sex, or painful sexual conditions, health, medicine, wellness, that's everything to do with sexuality. And how does that intersect with technologies, and technologies being everything from just a tool to do a thing right through to, the most sophisticated mixed reality stuff. So there's so many different options when I think about sex tech like that. And I think predominantly people go, sex tech is robots or vibrators. That's kind of what people would, if I'm doing a talk on sex, they're like, are they talking about robots, sex robots? Or, oh, you mean dildos, vibrators? Like, yeah, that, and like, you're not wrong. Yeah. You're not wrong, but there's like a whole huge thing. And, some of the most interesting parts of sex tech aren't robots or your robot girlfriend. It's great for Hollywood, but actually what about like, I think, Bumpin', I don't know if you've heard about them. They were called Handy before, right. Designing sex toys for people with mobility issues in the disability community. So cool. Like, that's really cool. Designing for the aging population, that's another cool thing. Like, there's so many rural areas. How do we deliver sex education there? For me, I geek out on that stuff. And I think I try and you know, I was doing talks before the pandemic for 2 years as like my job.
Mhm.
And I would always try and like steer people around, be like, sex robots are cool, but you know, there's all these other aspects that need our attention that are far more real and close to us than you know, having robot boyfriends is like decades away.
I feel so similar in terms of femtech and women's health being like, oh, you mean babies, like pregnancy, maternal health? And I'm like, yes. And bone health, brain health, heart health, like,
Yeah.
you know, and they're like, oh yeah, because like women have those. And I'm like, not only do they have it, but they have disproportionately high rates of migraines versus males, or, you know, or and same for autoimmune disease, or, you know, our heart disease looks a whole lot different than men's heart disease. And they're like, oh my God, they're not, you're not just baby makers. Nope, no, we're not.
I know. Yeah. And I think that's actually great advice for founders that are listening too, is to find a common ground when people do have that question of femtech or sextech you're working. It's like, rather than being like, no, it's not that, it's almost like, yes. And I think that really helped me go, yeah, sure, it's that, but it's all, let me tell you what else it is.
Yeah.
And you do have to do a bit of explaining, as you were saying at the start. You kind of have to, it's kind of, the onus is on us now to educate people, unfortunately, about what even the term is before you get to your product or service. You're like, okay, so
Yeah.
industry, here's my part in it, and here's my product.
What are some changes you've seen in the industry over time? I'm so excited because you've been in it for a while now. And so like, was it just sex robots and dildos and now it's more, or was it always more, or like, you know, how has it changed?
Yeah, you know, I think a lot has changed because people's attitudes have changed. I think that's the biggest thing that's changed the whole industry and society at large, is we're talking about sex so much more. Pandemic or not, I think, you know, the isolation and being either stuck with your partner or without a partner has definitely put a spotlight on intimacy, on our health, on all those sorts of things. And that's kind of the happy, I guess, silver lining of all of this sort of drama of the last 24 months has been so terrible for so many people, is we are more comfortable talking about sexuality and intimacy and realize how important it is. And I think that's opened up the conversation for not only media and just everyday conversations with family and friends, but for investments. And that's what we're seeing, is people are more willing to put a little bit more money on the table for sex tech products. In terms of what's changed in the products in the industry, from robots or whatever, you know, from porn focused, I think we had a real moment, especially around Me Too and Time's Up, where we had a lot of women coming in and creating brands and doing really interesting things with the marketing, I would say. You know, there's only so many ways you can innovate on a vibrator or a clitoral suction toy or a butt plug, right? But the marketing and the messages that were being sent out really changed and shifted from like typical like hot pink neon sexy stuff to more educational. We look at Dame or Maud or Unbound or Rosewell. There's so many now, you know, even Goop, right, that have made sex education a part of their message, and also sort of stripped it of its I want to say creepiness, not creepiness, but just kind of made it more acceptable. And so today what we're seeing is like high-end stores, like department stores, now stocking sex tech products, right? But much more, I would say the move has been recently into beauty, you know, like adjacent, like beauty, high-end luxe style. I'm trying to think of that department store that's like super expensive. Maybe it's Barney's. I don't know. Being an Aussie, I still haven't caught on after 10 years. But that's, again, like not a really technological innovative change, but a marketing change that seems to have worked, is placing things like vulva creams or dildos or, you know, lubes in the next you know, adjacent cupboard to beauty creams for eye creams. And so the placement's really different. So for better or worse, I think there comes a lot of privilege with that and a bit of inaccessibility when we're talking about price points and stuff. It's like, why would you be paying $200 for organic CBD lube, with special superpowers to make you come? But
yeah,
I feel like the big change has been in the communications, the storytelling, and the movement around female pleasure.
Do you see what I hear is that there's more women in the game now, right? So men were making the toys and they were like, women want giant phallic butterfly things, and now women are like, not really, gender neutral is cool. And by the way, don't actually like it to be giant and phallic and veiny. Like I rather this thing. But do you see additional diversity, not only in gender, but in like the, people innovating for different sexualities, and then also like people of different races or ethnicities or culturally competent toys? Is that even a thing?
Yeah, a little bit. I think what I've noticed being involved in Love Honey have this competition every year where it's called Designer Sex Toy. And it's so great because they get submissions from all over the world. And the last one we judged, which was pre-pandemic, right before the pandemic hit actually. And it was so cool because there were so many different shapes and abstractions and things that had nothing to do with replicating genitals, and were often like big vibrating like pad things or things that look kind of alien and different textures and stuff. And there's so much more we can do with pleasure when we strip it of like, it's almost like it's humanness, right?
Yeah.
And think about what sensations would be like and tailor it to different body types. As you said, not everyone wants a big king cock, with the veins and everything. Like pretty much, I think that's the minority that want that. And so it has been really cool. And that's one of my favorite things, is looking at the submissions for that come in from people that might not have a technical expertise, but they have their own experience. And this is what brings people to this industry, Brittany, as you would know, is our own personal experience feels so important, and for so many people in sex feels so lonely and isolated. And when you start to put those ideas out there and they resonate, you go, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. I think such a great example of that actually is Emily Sauer and her story about creating the O-Nut. Are you familiar with O-Nut?
Yeah.
That reduces the depth of penetration, these donut rings that you put on a penis for painful sex. And that reduces depth of penetration. You can have less painful sex, which is great. And I remember her telling me her story and her sort of that feeling that she was like, I think I'm alone. Like no one could help me. The doctors couldn't help me. I was alone.
Yeah, no, it's, it's so interesting. It's so funny how there's like literally solutions that come out, and like the solution itself actually inspires me to like, oh yeah, that could be a way to get pleasure, or for it to improve pleasure, like the O-Nut. Like I had that pain before with well-endowed partners, but I always was like, well, sometimes it hurts because he's that big, and it's just like, that's just how it is, but it's like, oh wait, there could be a solution for that. And the O-Nut actually taught me a little bit about anatomy and like what it was actually hitting and, like why and how. But similarly with Laurels, they're like these kind of latex panties for, oral sex, whether that be you're uncomfortable with, being skin on skin, or maybe you have like a herpes outbreak, and I was just like, oh my God, yeah, of course. Why are we always thinking only about condoms? Like, that's all we think about. And so like, what do you predict is like in your ideal world, actually? There's your practical prediction, but I want to know your ideal scenario. What's the future of sex tech? What does it look like?
I think it's, again, I always come back to the future of sex tech having less to do with technology and so much more to do with humans and how we're viewing sexuality, and it being more open and less judgmental and more shame-free. There being more money on the table to create more products and services that serve different niche audiences. That's what's really interesting to me, is everyone's sexual expression can look different. And there are so many people out there that think that they're alone, but they might be similar to someone that is also just a little bit different to someone else. And so I think For me, the future is like getting more money into this industry and seeing more amazing things happen for people that might not necessarily have the expertise, access to capital, but definitely have an idea and an experience. And at the root of that, Brittany, is education, and sex education for me is a big passion of mine. I think it will solve so many other things down the track. If we learned about pleasure, if we learned about painful sex, if we really learned about anatomy and things at a younger age, we wouldn't have to have so much focus on adult sex education. And so how does sex tech, how does technology play a role in delivering amazing sex education to people wherever they are in the world? And so for me, that's sort of my big bet that I'm hoping on in the dream world, is that we have incredible innovation around sex education, whether that is delivered by robots or it is delivered by virtual reality, which I think would be really cool. I think sex ed in VR is like that perfect intimate environment where you still, it's an intimate experience, you feel safe, but it's also like so innovative. And I think once we get there with that sort of stuff, I'd be really excited to see that. We've seen a couple of students out of Sextech School develop VR projects, one specifically in sex education, that get me really amped for what the future of sex tech could be.
We have a lot of founders listening, and I'm sure a lot of the sex tech founders are going to listen to this episode in particular. And so, I see companies being successful like Dame, and they have, or Mod, and they have product lines, right? They have multiple products, but then I see all these founders having a single product, right? And it's really hard for them to fundraise. And like the idea of like, what is that long-term value? Because how many times is somebody going to buy a toy, and so what are some of the suggestions you have for these types of founders?
I think it always starts with one product. I think there's the pressure should come off immediately in terms of thinking about creating a line. Dame started with one product. We all, coming back to that one product that really is the reason you do what you do, the reason that you're passionate, the reason that the start with one thing, I think is always good. It's always going to be so much worse than what you had in your mind too. I think that's one thing that people struggle with a lot, is like having this amazing vision, and then when they go to put it out, they're like, what the hell is this? I felt that way about my podcast. I don't know if you did too. I remember I deleted the first 14 episodes of my podcast because I was like, this sounds like I'm in a toilet. But get used to it. Those product lines, they come after you really find yourself and the product traction. And then you go, this, but it's okay to also change your mind. You might start out with a lube and then go, you know what, I'm going to make, STD tests instead. But I think that what's important is getting it out there first and testing it. So many people suffer in silence alone, work on things for years and years, pour a lot of their savings into it and never show it to anyone. And so for me, my advice is show your work all the time. Keep showing your work, keep getting the feedback. That's how these things evolve. And, I look back at my story or my trajectory in sex tech. I never could have imagined that. I probably thought it would just be a podcast, but it turned from a podcast to events, to a speaking career, and now to a school. And later on, who knows, a fund, a Accelerate, whatever it is, I don't know yet. But I'm creating my own product line in that sense. So I think start somewhere and show your work.
That's so cool. Speaking of venture funds, are there venture funds that invest specifically in sex tech?
Over the years, there's ones that keep popping up here and there, and it's hard to really nail one down. I don't know if you can speak to this yet. I want to see some more movement in the space, but Healthy Pleasure Group is one that I know of. Of course, you guys.
Yeah, we invest in sex tech. Yep. But again, it's not our main focus, and so we, at Coyote have 18 investments to make. And if we are trying to do portfolio construction, only a small percentage of those can be sex tech. Right. So that's why I was asking, like, is that a thing that's coming? Over the last 2 years, 6 FemTech funds have been formed. We now have 7. but it's like the last 24 months it's happened. And so I wonder if one of the barriers to the sex tech one is that vice clause that people talk about, which is the people who invest in venture funds have their own rules. They're when we talk about, I'm glad that Target is pro LGBTQ, but it's like all those large enterprises with branding like Nike and stuff, they can be loud and about movements, but there's richer people even behind those that aren't speaking up and are still really conservative or still like having their own opinions about stuff. And so I don't know, how long do you think it'll take us to finally, you and I, to be like one of the richer people making decisions behind
I know. Okay, well, just watch this space. There may be something coming next year. And I think, I'll leave it at that, but it's inevitable, right?
Yeah,
it's inevitable that we're going to get impossibly wealthy in this space, if not just spiritually. It's coming. Be patient and stay in the game.
Mm-hmm. I always say I have these like backup company plans. One of them is a vice bank for like drugs, psychedelics, sex. You need a bank? I got you. Like,
that's a great idea. It's so necessary, so needed. Please solve that. Solve that.
Well, this has been so much fun. I have two last questions our listeners really love. Sure. The first one is, we have a lot of university graduate students, people interested in entrepreneurship. So what's an area in women's health and wellness that still needs innovating?
Oh my goodness. I mean, look, isn't there just so many at the moment? I think for me, I've been really excited about, which has blown up, as you know, in the past like 12, 24 months, menopause market, I think is really interesting. And perhaps more interesting if you're experiencing it. I always feel like you should focus on your own, what's not working in your own life, and then see if that resonates with other people and start from that place. So menopause for student grads may not be the first place to think of, but thinking about what grinds your gears in your own life around that. And that's sort of where we all started. I think that's really the place to start. Other interesting areas, of course, are, disability and rural areas as well, but find your passion first, or find like something that's really bugging you. Actually, just find out what do an inventory of what's pissing you off, and then go and talk to people about it and see if it pisses them off too, and start there.
I love it. And then our last question is, what do you think the femtech industry as a whole needs the most right now in order to be successful?
Don't we all need money?
We need money, yeah.
I think that's the biggest barrier, Brittany. Everyone has the intellectual chops, the business skills, the creativity. If they don't have the skills to find people, I think what we need is more money to do more cool shit.
Yeah. Do you have any predictions where this money will come from?
These funds that we keep talking about, that I think that that's the way that it's going to happen. It feels like it's been brewing for a while, that people are going to, that are suddenly clicking and getting it and going, okay, well, we need a dedicated fund to this. Maybe something that steps outside of, doesn't have to deal with morality clauses, or does this. That's my hope. I think that's a very optimistic hope. Because the other alternative is like, we just prove these products out via crowdfunding or seed funds and stuff like that. And it's a longer road.
Well, I know one way to get VCs in the game is by showing exits. So has there been sex tech exits?
Not that I really know of. Do you know of any? I'm not yet. Like, there's not yet a unicorn. And I think when that happens, then it'll be easy. We just need that one. And then it all is a domino effect, because everyone wants to get in on it. But I wouldn't say it's that far away.
No. And I bet there are exits. And I think that it's probably similar to FemTech, where 2 years ago, I asked people, have there been any femtech exits? And people said exactly what you said. Maybe. I don't think so. Once we do, though, and don't you know it, I turned over enough rocks over the last 2 years that we actually have a database of 130 exits, of which 5 are over $1 billion. And so the issue actually wasn't exits. The issue is like research and publication of that information. No one had spent the time to look it all up, make a database, analyze it, write a report, right? And so people used to not think FemTech had exits, and now based on, you know, what I like to think is FemTech Focus's research and a lot of other people are like, oh yeah, FemTech, $1 trillion market. Yeah, of course, you know, and so maybe that's what Sextech needs, is a database, you know, that research.
It does. And watch this space for that also. But the infrastructure of the industry isn't there. You know?
Yeah, exactly.
That's how you can tell it's really green and new in that sense is like, there's no directories. There's, you know, modality researcher doing initial research on the space. We're just now seeing it pop up, you know, and all these conferences and things. But in terms of getting your business going, so I started Sextech School because it's like, where do we start?
Yeah.
There's nothing out there.
If you can buy every domain name with the word in it, it's a new industry. I own about 50 FemTech domains. I got FemTech Summit, FemTech Forward, FemTech First, FemTech all. I bought them all for $9. $9, you know? And so, you know, that's why also another, you know, when you're a founder, you have lots of plan B's through Z's. Another one is like selling the domain names because I'm like, well, like, it's popular enough now.
You could make a bit of rent money on that.
Yeah. Well, Bryony, this has been so much fun. You are amazing. I'm so glad we finally met. Two sisters working in our, you know, parallel universes with the overlap in sexual wellness, because it is health.
It is, absolutely. Brittany, thank you so much for having me. I hope we get the chance to hang out in person really soon.
Love that.